Well, good afternoon again. And I think you'll be thrilled with our closing speaker. What you heard today is it takes business leadership and technology leadership to lead today. And so we've invited one of the world's most top business thinkers and business writers, Don Tapscott, to present tonight. You probably know Don from some of his best-selling books, Wikinomics, and his most recent book, Macroeconomics, Rebooting Business and the World. Now, Don is a renowned speaker and esteemed professor at the University of Toronto. And today he's going to share his insights with us about how technology is changing the world and the impact it can make. And if you've ever seen Don present, you're going to really enjoy the next 30 minutes. But I want to share with you a little known fact about Don. He actually plays piano in a band up in Toronto. And when we invited him here and he heard about Paul, he put the press on us to see if he could play with Paul on stage. And so we had to tell him, no, his performance is about a business speech, not playing with Mr. McCartney. So I know he's a little disappointed, so let's give Don a warm HP welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, Don Tapscott.
Thanks very much, Rich. Actually, I am in a band. It's called Men in Suits. We used to do a concert every year, whether our public demanded it or not, but then we got good. But Paul McCartney, if you're in the audience, I'm your keyboard player, baby. Bring it on. First of all, let me thank you for hanging around. Wow, over 2 hours and you're all still sitting there. This is awesome. I love working with diehards. In fact, give yourself a big round of applause, would you, for having hung in there. Thanks very much. Secondly, who here is on Twitter? Would you, or uses Twitter? Would you put up your hands, please? Hold them up. Okay. Those of you who are on Twitter, the hashtag for this event is #HPDiscover. And my name on Twitter is @DTapscott if you want to tweet away. Well, you've heard here from all the different speakers today that this is a time of great transformation. It certainly is. I mean, the theme of the conference is a good one, discover. As Leo said, we're sort of discovering a whole new world in some ways. And what I'd like to do in the next period, and I'm going to try and keep it short because I understand I'm between you and a cocktail party, I'm going to try and convince you of the following idea, that you're part not just of the transformation of the enterprise, but you're participating in a turning point in human history, where many of the institutions that have served us well for decades or even centuries are now stalled. They're in atrophy, they're failing. And because of a revolution in technology and some other changes to the global economy, we can rebuild and transform these institutions around a whole new model. Now, what I'd like to do is begin with a story. And this story is about as far away from a .com or a social network that I can think of. And it's a story that kind of shows how social networking is not about hooking up online. It's becoming a new mode of production. And the story is about a guy named Rob McEwen. Now, the reason I know this story is because he's my neighbor. He moved across the street from me. And he held a cocktail party to meet the neighbors. And he said, "You're Don Tapscott. I've read some of your books." And I said, "Great. What do you do?" And he says, "Well, I used to be a banker, but now I'm a gold miner." He's a funny guy. He introduces his wife, Cheryl, to the group. He says, "I'm a gold miner. This is my wife, Cheryl. She's a gold digger." And anyway, thankfully, she's an enormously competent person with a sense of humor. But he tells me this amazing story. He's taken over a 50-year-old gold mining company, and his geologists can't tell him where the gold is. So he keeps giving them more money to get more geological data, and they can't tell him where to go into production. You heard Leo talk about the instant on organization. He was starting to worry that he was becoming a permanently off organization. You heard Bill McDermott talk about the moment of truth. he was starting to feel he was in an eternity of indecision. But he had a radical idea, an epiphany one day. And he wondered, if my geologists don't know where the gold is, maybe somebody else does. So he did a radical thing. He took his geological data, which in the mining industry is your biggest secret. It's kept in high security computer systems and safes and so on. He took his data and he published it, and he held a contest on the internet called the Gold Corp Challenge. It's basically $500,000 in prize money for anyone who can tell me, do I have any gold? And if so, where is it? He got submissions from all around the world. They used techniques that he'd never heard of. And for his $500,000 in prize money, Rob McEwen found $3.4 billion worth of gold. The market value of his company went from $90 million to $10 billion. I had dinner with him a couple of weeks ago. It's now at $33 billion. And I can tell you, because he's my neighbor, he's a happy camper. Now, what's going on here? It's not just that he thought, I'll use the internet to hold a contest. He thought very differently about how you get capability. He peered. You know, conventional wisdom is we have these hierarchies, and what he should have, and talent is inside your boundaries. So what he should have done is fired his head of geology, right? He didn't. He wondered who their peers are. Do you know that most of the best submissions didn't come from geologists? They came from computer scientists. There were chemists giving organic solutions. The winner was a computer graphics company that built a three-dimensional model of a mine. He peered. He was open. He stood in front of the world and he said, I'm the CEO of this company and I don't know if we have any gold, but we're going to find out. Here, Leo talking about baking transparency into the bones of your organization. He shared his intellectual property. This is the biggest secret in the mining industry. He didn't think global and act local. He acted globally. He viewed the world as his geology department, and he increased the value of his company by an order of magnitude. He embraced a whole new modus operandi for the corporation. Now, some of you may know that was the opening story in a book that I wrote 4 years ago, Wikinomics, and as Rich said, it was a big book. It was the best-selling management book of the year. And the book came out, and I was very pleased with the results, and then something happened. We had the meltdown. And who would have imagined 3 years ago that one of the big themes of business books today would be how to save capitalism, or is capitalism even savable? Now, for some reason, I end up on the same platform as this guy named Paul Krugman. You know, the New York Times economist, sort of a controversial guy. And he has this view that when you have a meltdown of a financial industry, you get a prolonged period of slump. He says, Japan had one in 1992. They're still in a slump. So he says, get ready for a couple of decades of awful economic activity and ugliness. And he says that's the good news scenario, because some things can happen that make it a lot worse. Well, far be it from me to debate a Nobel Prize winning economist, but I'm of the view that the future is not just something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future. But if we're going to do that, we need to understand what the problem is. And the problem doesn't fall within the mental model or paradigm of traditional economists. They worry about things like the business cycle and more fiscal stimulation or not. This is not a cyclical change that we're going through. This is a secular change. This is a fundamental transformation, and we need to discover what this future looks like. Now, I think that you look around, you see a whole bunch of institutions that are failing. This is the topic of my new book, Macroeconomics. By the way, if you buy this book, the best way to get it is in massive volume. You look like people with friends. Christmas is coming soon. No, seriously. Look around at our institutions. On the one hand, we see stagnation and failure. On the other hand, we see sparkling new initiatives based on the kind of technologies and principles that you've been sitting here listening to. Arguably, the industrial age has finally run out of gas. These institutions have taken us to a certain point around an old industrial model of mass production, mass distribution, mass education, mass democracy, mass media, mass marketing, mass society, and they can no longer take us forward. So the industrial age corporation, I mean, it was typified by the auto companies, right? America's greatest corporations, they went bankrupt. The financial system hasn't changed fundamentally. Wall Street still has the same modus operandi. And that modus operandi almost brought down capitalism. Newspapers are going bankrupt. 70 newspapers have gone under in the United States in the last decade. As one youngster said to us, if the news is important, it will find me. And the newspaper is no longer required. News has become a commodity. Now, there are lots of tough issues there. How do we have good journalism? How do we pay journalists? How do we prevent this balkanization where we're all following just the point of view that we like, and where we end up in these little self-reinforcing echo chambers where the purpose of information is not to inform us, but it's to give us comfort. Yet, there are new models of the newspaper, open network news that are emerging, spectacular. Our systems for global problem solving are having difficulty. The universities are losing their monopoly on higher education. It's a mass production model of education. It's the very best model of pedagogy that 18th century technology can provide. It's based on the lecture. You know, I'm a teacher, I have knowledge. You're a student, you're an empty vessel, you don't. Get ready, here it comes, right? To me, the process of the lecture is the process of the notes going from a lecturer to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either. Now, I appreciate the irony that I'm standing here giving you a lecture, but actually, you're not going to remember much about this. You won't remember the 16 institutions or the 5 principles or the 7 new business models, but hopefully I'll convince you to think differently about a single thing. Governments, democracy, all of these models are old industrial age approaches. We need to rebuild them around this new communications platform, the internet. Now, if you want to understand what's going on today, again, with respect to Paul Krugman, I don't think you go on back to 1991 or 1982. You need to go back to a previous period in human history. You know, a few hundred years ago, all around the world, we had this agrarian economy, and the political and economic system was called feudalism. And knowledge was concentrated in tiny oligopolies. People didn't know about things. There was no concept of progress. You were born and you died. But then along came Johannes Gutenberg with this great invention, the printing press, and over time, people began to acquire knowledge. And when they did, the institutions of agrarian feudal society appeared to be stalled, or in atrophy, or frozen, or failing. It didn't make sense for the church to be responsible for medicine. When people had knowledge, it didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to be running everything. So we saw the rise of parliamentary democracy, the Protestant Reformation. You know, Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. We saw the creation of the corporation and the university and science, and it was all good. Eventually, it led to the Industrial Revolution. It advanced our standard of living all around the world, but it came with a cost. And now, once again, what you've just heard about is the technology genie has escaped from the bottle, but this time it's very different. The printing press gave us access to the written word. The internet enables each of us to be a publisher and a producer of the written word and of all content. The printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The internet gives us access to the knowledge contained in the crania of other people on a global basis. This is taking us into a new age of networked intelligence. Now, What I just told you, this is not a new idea. I've been writing about this stuff for 30 years. Some of you may have read a book by Alvin Toffler, The Third Wave. He talked about an agrarian age and an industrial age and an information age. I don't think it's an information age, but we'll cut him some slack on that. These are not new ideas. They are ideas whose time had not come. They were ideas in waiting. And they were waiting for some big developments. And that's what Discover is about. First of all, for a technology revolution. They were waiting for the new web. Very different from the web of the dot-com period. You access the new web through the thing, right? Billions, soon trillions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. I'm typically covered in these things, smart communicating devices. My door here in the hotel has a chip in it, and it's a new hotel. It probably has an IP address. The door has knowledge. I had a camera stolen from a hotel room in Miami, and the door knew about me. It knew who'd been in and out of the room. We found an unauthorized access. I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address. And all this stuff talks to itself. I have no idea what his refrigerator says to his toaster. But he was actually bragging that his fence talks to his sprinkler system. And I said, well, Ken, why would you care? And he says, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. So this is pervasive ambient computing. Then we have the rise of broadband mobility, geospatiality. Take your little device and use Google goggles or Layer, walk outside this hotel, and what you see is on the screen. It's telling you what you're seeing. The old web, you surf websites. The new web, you surf physical reality. We have the rise of true multimedia and of web services, and you heard a lot about that. Everything is a service. I think 3 speakers referred to that today. The old web was based on the old HTML, which was a platform for the presentation of content. The new web is based on XML and SOAP and UDDI and these new standards for apps. It's a new lingua franca for distributed computing. We have a global computer now that everybody can use. That's what the cloud is. It's a computer that we can all use, and this computer is enriched with services. And finally, we have integration of the web with real IT. You didn't have to worry about real IT in the past and the internet because these two were separate. The only way they came together was around this thing called the internet, well, or the intranet. Well, now you can move your IT onto this computer, the cloud. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not an easy thing to do. You're probably thinking I'm trivializing this a bit. And Leo talked about hybrid computing environments, and sure enough, I mean, this irresistible force of a new paradigm is meeting up with an immovable object of $4 trillion of heavy metal. And so I know some of you out there, you have systems that are old enough to vote and drink. And, you know, God may have created the world in 6 days, but he didn't have an installed base to deal with. Now, I have to confess, I used that joke before, and it was behind the screens was a huge window. And unbeknownst to me, there was a thunderstorm shaping up, and I dutifully delivered that line. I said, God may have created the world in 6 days, but he didn't have an installed base. The moment I said that, I kid you not, a bolt of lightning cracked across the stream. The whole room shook with thunder, and then everyone's like, then they all burst into laughter. My only regret was we didn't capture it on video because I could have put it up onto YouTube or something. Tapscott gets endorsement from powerful force, you know, for big idea or something like that. Anyway, this is point number 1, the new web. Point number 2 is this is intersecting with the demographic revolution. I started studying kids about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. At first I thought my children are prodigies. But then I noticed all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So I started working with 300 kids, and I wrote this book. And I said, this is a new generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language. And they have no fear of technology because it's like the air. It's not there. Well, flash forward to today. They're coming into the workforce, the marketplace, and into society, and there's no more powerful force for change. This is a World Congress in IT. It was a big crowd. It's like this, about 7,000 people, and I interviewed these youngsters. On the left there is a woman named Rahaf Harfou. She's living in Paris. Her boyfriend is in Toronto, and so they turn on video, Skype for a year while they're apart to keep their relationship going. They cook together across the ocean and stuff. I asked her, Rahaf, do you use email? And she said, oh, no, Mr. Tapscott, email is yesterday's technology. And I said, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? And she said, email, that's sort of like a formal technology, say for sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. Two down from her is Sherry Kong, 20-year-old student in New Zealand, hired by the government along with 80 other students. Her job? To teach the teachers how to use the internet in the classroom. I asked her, so Sherry, what are the teachers like as students? And she says, oh, the teachers, they're terrible students. They talk in class, they don't do their homework. I'm giving out pink slips all the time. And beside her is Michael Furtick. He's the granddaddy of them all. He was 13 when I first met him about 15 years ago. He was, as a 13-year-old, he was the project manager on my website, growingupdigital.com. They made him the project manager because he was the oldest and most experienced on the team. So this is humbling. It's the first time in human history when children are an authority. And we interviewed or surveyed 11,000 young people in 10 countries. These are the norms that drive this generation. And one of them is speed. Well, they want immediate gratification. You know, my daughter commuted to Minneapolis from Toronto every week when she was consulting to Best Buy. And she could check into the Marriott Hotel there in 30 seconds. She wonders, why does it take 30 days for my government to do something that's equally complicated? In their culture is the new marketplace and the new culture of work. Now you put those together and you get a social revolution. I could show you 50 charts, and I won't, but they all look the same. They all show the old HTML website being eclipsed by the XML-based community. The old one thought the internet's about content is king. The new one said, no, it's about creating a context. The old one was an information creator. The new one, a curator. The old one created a website. The new one built a vibrant community. And I think you shouldn't have a website. It's this dumb .com idea. Of course you need a web presence, but don't think of it as a website. Think of it as a platform for people to self-organize. It's the rise of new collaborative communities. And I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go to an example here. Somebody who figured this out was Barack Obama. And I'll tell you how I learned about this was about 3 years ago, someone sent me an email saying, you know this guy, Obama, he's running for the Democratic nomination. He thinks your book, Wikonomics, is the key to winning the presidency and transforming America. Go to mybarackobama.com. So I went there, and there on the screen was my book. And it says, we believe in the principles of collaboration, peering, and self-organization, transparency, and the book Wikonomics. He said, I'm asking you to believe not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington, I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing, and well, my first reaction was, I am the man. But not so fast. As it turns out, I'm not the man. Because I looked around, there's a Wikonomics community, there's also a single moms who support daycare community, and a firefighters for Obama community. He created a platform whereby 35,000 communities self-organized, and that's what brought him to power. Now, has he changed the way you get elected? Has he changed the way you govern? Probably not, and arguably that's hurting him. This is a revolutionary force. I've called it, now, it's happening, the Arab Spring is the wiki revolution, where social media not only drops transaction costs of innovation and wealth creation, they drop the transaction costs of dissent and of rebellion. And young people at their fingertips now have the most powerful tool ever for finding out what's going on, for organizing collective responses, and even for bringing them down an old regime. This is a time of great danger and peril, but it's a time of unbelievable opportunity. And that brings us to the final one, a big change in the deep structure and architecture of the corporation, where throughout the 20th century, we created wealth through these old vertically integrated corporations. They did everything from soup to nuts. Then information technology started to extend the enterprise and make the boundaries of the corporation more porous. Then we saw the rise of business webs, ecosystems, as Leo referred to them. Companies like HP, Cisco, and others figured this out, and they succeeded while their competitors fell behind. And now, the costs of collaboration and transactions are dropping so fast that peers can come together and create value. They can create an encyclopedia that's as good as Britannica and 10 times bigger. They can create a computer operating system, Linux, that's about to become the dominant operating system in the world. And they can create a physical good, like a motorcycle. The Chinese motorcycle industry is a whole bunch of little companies that work as peers. They come together in tea houses and on the internet. There's no OEM, there's no Harley Davidson pulling all the strings. This is now 1/3 of all global motorcycle production. So 4 big drivers, and there's a 5th one. The economic crisis, and I don't mean to be cute here with a pun. So we have some new principles, and I've referred to them. Collaboration, openness, sharing, independence, and building integrity into our bones. And these are the principles of the 21st century enterprise. So this is a time when we need to discover a new future. And it's a time where leadership is required. In the old model of the leader, the great visionary at the top, selling a vision down, you know what? The person at the top can't learn for the organization as a whole anymore. Things are becoming too complicated. So that means that leadership is each of our personal opportunity if we will it. I think that if we stick with these old industrial age approaches to doing just about everything, that the future will be a bleak one, but there's a new and brighter future that we can take. Now, I'd like to end by getting you to think about something. Towards the end of writing the book, Anthony Williams and I started wondering, what does an age of networked intelligence look like? And we'd looked at hundreds and hundreds of human examples, and we thought, why don't we go to nature and see what we can learn there? You know, fish come in schools, birds come in flocks, starlings come in something called a murmuration. Over the moors in England, for example, throughout the day, starlings are flying around in a 20-mile radius, sort of doing their starling thing, foraging for food and so on. And at night, the birds come together, and they create one of the most extraordinary things in all of human nature. It's a sense and respond, sort of instant enterprise of sorts. And it's called a murmuration in reference to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. Now, the murmuration is not just for show, it has a function. It warms the birds up for the cold night ahead, and it enables the birds to have collective power. Look at that. They're protecting themselves from that predator. They're chasing away their enemy. Scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. And there's no one great leader. Leadership constantly changes. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we actually learn something from this? Well, if you think about it, this murmuration is functioning according to the kinds of principles that I've just been talking to you about collaboration. There's an openness, there's a sharing of information, even about food sources. There's a great interdependence. Just like in business, we should learn that from this crisis that business can't succeed in a world that's failing. Somehow these starlings function as if they have interests individually that are consistent with the interests of the collective. And there's a sort of integrity that gives the birds great courage to take on a fearsome competitor. Now, this is not some kind of collective intelligence, because the birds aren't intelligent. It's more a tightly integrated set of impulses. But humans have intelligence, and humans have consciousness. What would it mean if we could connect ourselves on this planet through these vast networks of glass and of air? Could we go beyond just sharing information and sharing knowledge to start to share our intelligence, perhaps to achieve some kind of consciousness that extends beyond an individual or a group or an organization or a society? You know, I look at those courageous kids today in the Middle East that understand they have collective power. They can't go home. They can't give up, because if they do, the old regime will hunt them down. I look at this murmuration and I get great hope that by connecting ourselves, perhaps this smaller world that our children inherit could be a better one. As a great philosopher said, we should welcome the future, for soon it will be the past. And we should respect the past, for it was once all that was humanly possible. It was possible to build these industrial age organizations, but it's now possible to go forward. And there is nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. Hopefully the time has come for each of you to find that, I don't know, leader within you to transform your enterprise, and in doing so, to change the world. Thank you very much.